Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Essential NFL Podcast. My name is Stephen Clinton. I'm your host here, and yeah, this is going to be sort of a mid-season review as we look at the Week 10 matchups across the NFL, and it is actually also going to be the last show I do here. So yeah, not that there's a massive subscriber base for this particular iteration of me doing football stuff, but yeah, it's been a fun journey since I got into the quality control stuff at Northwestern, and I guess about 20 years now since I first kind of got the idea that maybe I'd be able to find a role in the football world to some degree or another. Learning about Bill Belichick and the Patriots dynasty, and didn't know about Ernie Adams at the time yet, but kind of Belichick with the economics background and all. And yeah, away I went to Northwestern, and here we are all these years later. So yeah, been a heck of a ride, a lot of fun, but yeah, just moving into a stage in my life where I won't be watching the film anymore, and been a really fun ride learning about it all, but certainly got to put the work into have, I think, any sort of coherent opinion on this stuff. So I will no longer be a great source for that, but yeah, just before I start the show, just a huge thanks to everybody out there who helped me along this journey from when I started at Northwestern, and all the folks that taught me what to look for on film. And yeah, I've had so much fun with it all and been able to make my living off of it for a long time. But yeah, a lot of exciting things ahead just in data science in general. And then my books, if you've been listening to the show at all, that I write fiction. Yeah, got a stack of the Bubble Society back there with the yeah, so plenty to get into. But yeah, hey, we're here to talk about football, right? So let's do this. Run this around one more time. Since it is mid-season and people are doing award shows and such, I won't be throwing out awards, but figured I'd just talk big picture football, because I think that's where I really enjoy my opinion, or I think my opinion stands out maybe the most. Just kind of looking at some of the big picture stuff about league mechanics and salary cap stuff. I'm not the nitty gritty guy, but like looking at kind of where it's all going, big picture, and how resources are being deployed. So throw in the fact that the trades deadline just took place, and I think it's a great week to talk about that. So we'll take that stick on the show. So let's kick it off with the Las Vegas Raiders and the Denver Broncos. And the Broncos, 9.5 point favorites here, nine. Yeah, depending on the book, you might even see an 8-5, which that seems a little low, and 42 and a half total. And guess let's talk the Raiders first and get kind of that out of the way. And despite the Raiders nearly beating the Jaguars and losing on the 2-point conversion last week, I mean, that was just it's not a good football game. In my opinion, that's one where you're watching the film and, I'm kind of hoping that, hey, maybe both, offenses kind of got it going this week. And yeah, I would say not so much on that front. And, with the Raiders, I think, it just continues to be disappointing with Geno Smith. Obviously, they have a great player in Brock Bowers, but, it's just one more year on Max Crosby's body here. And, the defense is just not there. I thought that Darian Porter, Iowa State product and Matt Campbell guy, so you hate to say this, and obviously he's got a long career ahead of him as a mid-round pick, but he really struggled against pretty much everybody that Jacksonville threw at him. Now, whether or not Jacksonville took advantage of the how open they were getting, that's I would say decidedly no would be my answer. But I didn't think that was looking good at all. So I think this Raiders team is just so far away, and whether or not they want to be winning, that's great. I think everybody wants to win, right? And they've got three other teams in their division that are actually set up to win, and I don't really see how they're going to close the talent gap anytime in the next couple of years. Particularly because it looks like they're going back into the quarterback market. So I'd assume that they will have the high pick when this is all said and done at the end of this year here, but very, very disappointing so far. And yeah, just not a lot to hang your hat on either in terms of just any of it working really. It's, Brock Bowers was back and that was the positive, right? Like, Colton Miller's still out with his injury. Yeah, tough go of it, obviously, Pete Carroll's done a lot of great things in the league, and there's, a lot of good people there. So, maybe we'll see in the next couple of years here, but it's been a tough go of it. And, this Denver Broncos team, it is something else watching Bo Nix operate just week to week. And, some of it's so good. And, it'll be one of those things, I won't get to watch this evolution, but, seeing where he'll be in a year, 2 years from now. Because we'll talk about some guys later on the show that it just takes time with some of these quarterbacks, and we want the improvements to happen week to week. We want it to happen in just that first off season, and then away you go. But I think you have to really appreciate what are the positive things that these players are doing when they're young, and understand that this you know obviously from a financial standpoint and a pie in the sky world perspective, obviously winning a Super Bowl on a rookie quarterback deal is ideal because you've got all these extra resources. But at the end of the day, it's going to be difficult for a guy to really be maintaining, a super high level of play week to week unless he's a truly special prospect. And so obviously nobody's ever going to stop chasing that player or anything like that. But I think that using that as just kind of your team building philosophy, and chasing it too much is a little bit dangerous. I think you want to be flexible, right? So we'll see where Bo Nix goes from here. They got all sorts of talent around him in Denver. That's for sure. They've got the system rolling, and I expect them to smoke the Raiders here, especially with their defense going against Geno Smith in this offense. Foresee some mistakes. Would not be. I haven't looked at the numbers on Geno Smith's player props right now, but I would assume the odds of him throwing an interception are relatively high. So, and Denver, big picture. I mean, I think it's hard to point to an organization that's in as solid a shape as Denver is, from top to bottom. I think it's really, how far is the quarterback going to raise the ceiling, and is Bo Nix going to put them over the top? But I think that, 3 more years left on the rookie deal after this one, and I assume that Denver is going to field a contender every single one of those seasons. There's, they've just got so many great pieces in place right now, and with the way that the salary cap is going to be going up, or is projected to go up these next couple of years, if that all holds, why can't Denver keep the players that they want to keep in house? So yeah, they'll have draft picks to keep adding, and maybe add someone here or there. But I think that they're in just tremendous health organizationally. So yeah, things moving along well for the Denver Broncos. So yeah, it's a good time for the home state team here for me out in Colorado here. So moving forward to the overseas game, we got Atlanta heading to Indianapolis. Indianapolis with the big trade for Sauce Gardner, and speaking of teams that should be in pretty good shape moving forward here. I think that obviously it was a lot to give up for, especially given what some of the competing prices have been for other players out there, right? Like but Michael Parsons, that situation where he was disgruntled, and that seems to have added to that deal even being able to get done, right? I think that's a difficult one to gauge it against. And I guess the point that I'm getting to here is that, if you make a habit out of doing stuff like this, then you're going to run your organization into the ground. You can't do this kind of stuff on a regular basis. But at the same time, the Colts, they're playing with a little bit of found money here where, it looked like they busted out on the Anthony Richardson pick, and it's going to just, totally sideline them. And, kind of like the Niners, obviously a different path to finding the quarterback, but they find a quarterback who's playing at a really high level in Daniel Jones. And Daniel Jones has always had all the physical traits. I think that everything was there. There's a reason he was a first round pick. And, with the situation that they're in, they're well on their way to, picking in the back part of the first round here. And so, that pick's going to be a late pick. So, there's, if you keep it up next year, then hopefully those are both late picks, and you continue to move forward. And obviously hitting on those picks is very important to keeping things right for your roster. But at the same time, the Colts had a clear need at the cornerback spot, and they get to add a young player who's signed up for the long term, is has his deal done. And again, we're talking about a league where the cap is going up and up, and Sauce Gardner's deal is already done, and he's extended for several years. So I think they're in a good position there. So there's a lot of positives to it at the end of the day. And I think for the Jets, we'll get to them later and the state of things there, but I guess that's what they felt like they needed to do. But I think that prices involved in all, it's all well and good, but they've got a lot of things going for them. I mean, Latu, had a nice spin move for a sack in this last game, and there's so many guys playing well there. I think it's worth the shot, given how this has all kind of come together with Daniel Jones in the middle of it all. So flipping over to the Atlanta Falcons, good to see Michael Penix have positive game against New England. We'll see where it all goes. I think with Penix right now, I'm just kind of at a stage where I need to see it week over week, right? And if we get the best of Michael Penix and he elevates himself over these next, the back half of the season and gets the Falcons to the playoffs, it's a different story. But this is, tracking perilously close to, if the Falcons miss the playoffs here and they've already traded away that first round pick, this is just getting to be a tough situation for everyone involved. And, at some point there's not going to be patience from ownership. And, I would sure think that you're going to stick this out through next year, because there's too much good going on in Atlanta, in my opinion. Like, they've got, I think there are ways you can get after their defense a little bit. We talked about that on last week's show with some of the specific ways. You've seen teams attack them of late, but there's so much positive going on there. And if they have another offseason to, even without that first round pick, to add a couple more pieces, like that defense could get even better. I think it's just the balancing act of pushing to contend here. And again, they've given up resources. And it's going to be tough to find players in free agency. So yeah, I think they're just, back half of the season is going to be so telling for Atlanta, because they really pushed it in. And I think right now they feel like they're in more of a developmental stage. I feel like the Vikings are in a similar spot. We'll talk about them in the next game here. But, right now, Michael Penix is still growing as a quarterback, and this organization is not set up like, the Broncos are around Bo Nix, from a player in a similar class, where, the Broncos just, you feel good about, kind of how they're stacked across the board. You feel good about the depth. We already talked about them. I think that Atlanta, it's just a shallower roster. And even though they've added some, good players on the defense, I've talked about, Xavier Watts on this show multiple times now. I feel like he pairs well with Jesse Bates, but, it's just, it's a tough needle to thread in the NFL, right? And I'm not sure that they've done it. And if they haven't done it, then can they improve enough going into next year to reverse that trend, when they might be facing more competition in their division if the Panthers and Saints kind of find a way to elevate themselves. So, we'll see how it all shakes out. It's been tough with, if you go back to articles, like, obviously where Atlanta has allocated their resources, it's a tough deal to be paying the backup quarterback as much money as you're paying Kirk Cousins, and have him come out and play as poorly as he did when he's called upon. So yeah, it's just, that's a tough pill to swallow, right? So we'll see. I think the Colts get it back on track this week. And I just don't trust Michael Penix week to week yet. I think that not a great game for Daniel Jones last week against the Steelers by any means, but the body of work over the first half of the season. And there's enough good throws in that game that I'm not, throwing him out. I think that Daniel Jones is playing really strong ball, and, turnover issues aside, it's all these New York guys, right? Much like Sam Darnold, I'm not saying Daniel Jones isn't going to have, another couple games that might be pretty bad, but like I'm more than happy to sign him up to, maybe they can use Sam Darnold's deal as kind of a starting point in Indy. I think you definitely want to get this done, right? You don't want to go into, how can you go into the quarterback wilderness after this, right? You've got no first round picks the next couple of years. So, I think that you've got a really strong starting point with the Darnold deal. And, hopefully for Indy, Daniel Jones, he's playing great. He could, who knows what happens this year. But then I think that, that this 2-3 year period for Daniel Jones is so important, because if he can just keep building like Darnold's continued to build, like Baker continued to build in Tampa, I think that he can. Again, there's a reason he got drafted as high as he did, and now he's realizing all that. So I think fun time to be a Colts fan, and for the Falcons fans, we'll see where it all goes. Penix is there's some Daniel Jones well, what I would say, the comparison I was going to make there is just, obviously Penix has been up and down. He's probably had more up games than maybe Daniel Jones had. Daniel Jones had that really strong one out of the gate. But yeah, it's a long process. So we'll see where it goes. Baltimore, Minnesota. This is, and we'll speed this up a little bit here. Baltimore, Minnesota. Ravens getting 4 or 3.5 on the road, depending on where you're looking. 48.5, 49. Baltimore get Lamar Jackson back, and everything's rolling. And I kind of mentioned in passing a week ago. When I was talking about them getting Nate Wiggins and Marlon Humphrey on the outside, clarified that what allowed them to do that is the trade for Alohi Gilman, right? And they've been able to, it's so funny to me how last year it was Kyle Hamilton moving back to deep safety that ends up shoring up the defense and solving the problems they have. This year it's moving him back up so he's playing in the slot again, where he's just so dominant as just an avatar out there, right? And now they've got Malachi Starks. Now they've got Alohi Gilman who can play deep, and they've just got a lot more versatility. So good playing out of that big nickel package now, and away the Ravens go here. And obviously it's tough. They're not going to get Matabuke back. Jeez, butchered his name for a second there. But I think that the Ravens, I think I mentioned this on another. It's just so funny how under Harbaugh they just find a way. They're just going to continue to problem solve, and they make adjustments on defense, and it seems like they find their flavor each year. So if they can stay healthy, I think that this is a much saltier defense than we thought just a few weeks ago here. And then obviously Lamar being back, I think that offense gets humming here, hopefully. Now the big question to me is, I feel like they always, and this dates back to Greg Roman, in Baltimore, there's kind of this flirtation with pushing the latest version of Lamar's improvements in the passing game. And but at the same time, I think that where they're most devastating is when they're under center, emphasizing the downhill run game with Derrick Henry as the primary kind of go-to play in the offense, and then building everything off of that, running the play action off of that, letting Lamar cut it loose and do everything he does well. But I think that when they get away from that and they start trying to operate out of the gun as kind of the initial mode of engagement, that's where they kind of almost get too cute for their own good. And at the end of the day, I think they're much better off when they just come in and they assert themselves as the bully on the block, as the more physical team out there, and then they'll get to everything else. But I think that playing it with that game plan is just just do it against every defense in the NFL. I don't think they can stop the Ravens when they do that, but when they get away from that, it gets tough. I think especially against this Vikings defense that likes to do so much show front stuff and everything like that. Just run right into that, and all that stuff is not all that effective when you just start punching them in the mouth, right? It's all that stuff kind of goes out the window a little bit. So I think it all lines up for this game against the Vikings. For the Vikings, obviously, the numbers much better for J.J. McCarthy. I thought it was a really inconsistent game with his ball placement against the Bears, against the Lions last week in that victory. I thought that it's a good game for him. I'm not trying, but at the same time, I didn't see it as dramatically different than some of his other tape. If you're just watching down to down, that there's still a lot of promise there, but right now it's just inconsistent. And I just want to see him put the ball where he wants to put it on a more consistent basis here. So there's great throws mixed in there. There's plenty of potential, right? And but I think that with the way that the Ravens are kind of finding themselves defensively, some of the things that they'll throw at JJ, and then just some of those differences, I think the Ravens have probably a bigger advantage in this game than you might think. And I think that the Vikings offense might struggle a little bit more than a 49-point total would indicate here. I think that people might not quite have caught on about the Ravens defense, and that might be driving that a little bit, although nothing to assert that for 100%. So speaking both of these teams in the long term, Baltimore is going to be up there as long as they've got Lamar, it seems like, and they've got this organization. They get it. They continue to replenish with lots and lots of players, and once they, you're going to hit on some good players, you got to just keep finding them via all avenues, right? When you're in this position where you're going to be in the playoffs every year, and Chiefs, Bills fit this designation very well. Eagles we'll talk about, but they just got to keep humming, and it's all just finding the year that it clicks for them, right? I don't know. I personally think that, anybody who's sitting here telling you that this Ravens team hasn't been good enough to win the Super Bowl these last couple years with Lamar at his peak. Last year in particular, I think that's a little bit of a crazy story. Just hasn't worked out yet. Single elimination games in the playoffs, right? So, and then for Minnesota, I think that it's kind of an unrealized vision in terms of they worked so hard to get to the rookie quarterback contract, and then so many of these guys that were available to sign in free agency with that excess money were just older, and just Javon Hargrave maybe had maybe his most impactful game in this last one. I thought Jonathan Allen, I would say, we played more. Javon Hargrave showed up a couple times, just flashing in, but Jonathan Allen actually had some good stuff. I think that some of those additions just hasn't hit the way that you hoped. So we'll see how well that group holds up together over the next couple of years, because I don't really see the Vikings competing for a Super Bowl. Like JJ McCarthy would have to really elevate his level of play over the back half of the season, and that would be. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that happens for him. For Penix, they flashed at moments, but I'd put my money on Penix almost with some of the really highs he's had for whole games versus McCarthy, where he is right now, where I think it's going to be more of a two-year thing, and hopefully he's just keeps coming along, and by next year you're really ready to push. But I just don't see it this year. But again, another team that, unless McCarthy takes a big step back, and you would think that with coaching that's as good as it is with Kevin O'Connell out there, I think that they just keep moving forward here, and they'll just keep adding in what's a very competitive NFC North, where really every organization has it together. And barring something really strange happening, it's hard not to see these teams continuing to compete really for this, not only this year but the next 3 years. I don't see why any of these 4 teams wouldn't be competitive. So I think a couple more organizations. There's a lot of good teams in the NFL right now. We're going to talk about two more of them right here. As I say, Baltimore, Minnesota this week. I do think the way the Ravens deep offense lines up and plays is a significant advantage over the Vikings. The Patriots and the Buccaneers. Is anybody in better shape as an organization right now than the New England Patriots? I think that that they crushed this offseason, right? Like, paying the extra money for Milton Williams was, I think that's the best move of the offseason. With again, I referenced the way the cap is going up. The impact that Milton Williams brings relative to some of the alternatives there, and there really wasn't an alternative, right? It was like doing a smorgasbord. It was just, he probably should have gotten paid more. And it was already a high number, but just understanding the dynamics of the markets and everything like that moving forward, I think that just worked out really well for them. Harold Landry's been playing really good ball. I think that you got some veterans that are more stopgap options, but those guys have stepped in and they've played they've allowed the team to play winning football, right? Like Garrett Bradbury at center would be a good example there, where I don't think that he's some needle mover for them necessarily. And Stephon Diggs has been more part of the group than maybe when you looked at this list of names, and it's like, well, I don't know, Stephon Diggs might be coming off the ACL, but with everybody else, we saw a lot of these guys last year. But Drake May, with him taking the next step with his accuracy, and obviously everything around him has changed too, but you try to isolate things for players when you're grading their film, and on know how to get around the fact that when you were watching Drake May last year, there were just some sprays, and that's not to say there weren't a bunch of really great throws. That's kind of what I'm talking about with some of these other young quarterbacks. And then you make that jump where, hey, the accuracy is just, you don't have throws where you're just missing routine throws you need to make in the NFL. It's like, no, the routine throws are to use Mike Tomlin's verbiage, he makes routine plays look routine with those, and then he makes spectacular plays look routine with the way Drake May is placing the ball down the field right now. And you add in what he brings with his legs and really his willingness to use his legs, and hopefully continue to avoid contact and not get hurt doing that. I think that he's generally shown there's obviously some he's getting hit some, but I think that overall, I think that he does show a good awareness and, a willingness to get down. So I think it's, all positive in New England right now. You've got just so much going for you. And Now it'll be loading up through the draft. But right now, I think that this is a roster that can win the Super Bowl without a doubt. Like, I think Carlton Davis is playing well across from, Christian Gonzalez. Now that Gonzalez is back and crushing it. And yeah, Mike Vrabel is obviously an outstanding head coach and has done a phenomenal job getting this going. Josh McDaniels doing just such a great job with the offense, scheming this whole thing up. It's just, such a well put together offense. Like, it's that's the word more than anything. It's so well put together, and just there's so many variations off of everything's a package, right? There's not just like random plays thrown in there for the sake of, oh well, somebody's saying we should use 6-0 line or this, or so we should throw in some plays with that don't make sense within the structure of the rest of what we're doing. It's like, no, everything has its place, and the funky looks, they just keep building off of them. So yeah, it's I'll miss watching this continue to evolve out there in New England. But yeah, they should be in a damn good shape with Drake May at the head of the ship here. And flipping it around, speaking of teams with somebody at the head of the ship, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they're 2.5-point favorites in this game, which I think that's they're the home team and all, but man, I think it's closer to a pick 'em in my mind. Drake May is just so freaking spectacular right now, and that's not to take away from everything Baker's done this season, but man, like May's just, and I think that I would lean towards some of the players on that New England defense personally. Although I really am liking how Tampa is coming along. I mean, if Jamel Dean's health is been key, but he's been great when he's been out there this season. I think that some of the young guys, I think Jacob Parrish is looking good for the Bucs. So I don't think it's an overwhelming defense in Tampa Bay. But I think it is definitely a better group than what they've had. So this game of the week type of game. But I think that Tampa, it's not to the same degree with New England. Drake May is just a freak, right? And but and then he's got 3 years left on his rookie deal. But Baker is continuing to play really well, elevate this group around him. Obviously the Mike Evans injury is really unfortunate, but it just goes to show you the wisdom of taking Emeka Egbuka if you like that player that much. And obviously he's had the injuries of late, but you look at the Bucs outlook right now over the next few years, especially with Godwin struggling to get back from injury. And I think that the presence of Egbuka makes you feel a lot better about things moving forward. So, this has been a tough season for them with injuries and all, especially on the right side of that offensive line. But, another organization that, maybe they don't have the spectacular report card A plus, but I think that Tampa does so many things well, and they've been winning for a long time down there, and keep getting that. But yeah, it should be a good game. If you want to be running a teaser this week, I think that teasing New England up to 8.5 is fantastic. So jumping forward, Jacksonville, Houston, man. Two organizations, one with bad literal health this week, with CJ Stroud knocked out of that game, which I know that D'Amico Ryans came out and went about after the game. I'd be upset about that too, with kind of the way Azeez Al-Shaair has been, and for a good reason. Some of these hits, some of them are not great hits, but at the same time, the way that they singled him out and then they pick up the flag on that hit, that was confusing to me. Houston, though, at least it's been moving in the right direction. Offensive line, I think, it's definitely playing better. It was hard to get worse, but again, it's been so competition dependent. So, Josh Hines Allen got after this group last time, and Arion Tiersery is going to have his hands full, but we'll see. Now it's Davis Mills playing this matchup this week, which makes the game a lot less compelling. And despite that, this is still just basically a pick'em game. I see it 1.5 on both sides. Totals 37.5 for this game. I think that things are getting concerning in Jacksonville in a lot of ways. Watching that game against the Raiders, there's just so many mistakes being made, and Trevor Lawrence is just, he's so erratic, and he's just, his ball placement is just not where it needs to be. Speaking of, making routine plays look routine, he that would be a gap between where he and Drake May are right now. Just all the easy passes, just not hitting all the layups. I feel like Lawrence is not necessarily doing that. Yeah, the horrendous decision throwing that one into the end zone this week, which I mean, I don't know what to say about that. And then you just got so many problems that are built into this roster. And, I think that the fact that Walker Little and Ezra Cleveland are paid on the left side of the line is not good. And, now you got, so, I don't know what they're going to do this offseason with those deals, but I think you have to think about moving on from them, or looking for a new starter, but that's easier said than done at those positions. And they've got problems on defense. I think at this point, it's fair to say, just there's not very much, they don't have a whole lot in the back end. And I don't think they got better by trading Tyson Campbell for Greg Newsome, who they're not going to have to pay. So I don't know. These guys took a really bold stance, and they trade that one, the future one, to go up and get Travis Hunter, who, I don't think that he had the impact that you want him to, and now he's out with a knee injury. And yeah, it's just, yeah, I don't know how you can say things are going great. It's great they eked out the win against the Raiders last week, but I thought that was an unbelievably disappointing performance for this team coming out of the bye week. And just not having the miscues really cleared up at all. So, we'll see where it goes. I, had some optimism about the pieces they had in Jacksonville, but it's not going well. And yeah, they would be an organization, I'd say, like, I don't really know where this goes. I don't know if Trevor Lawrence is the quarterback there in 2 or 3 years. I think that it's kind of all on the table at this point. And, they've got so much invested in this team. Again, they already moved next year's first round pick, which, I'm not thinking that this team's going to make the playoffs. And, we'll see. It's going to be close. It certainly helps that they're not going to have to face CJ Stroud this week, because I think the Texans would have been very, very likely to win the game in that case. But I just don't think that this Jacksonville team is really showing kind of the ceiling that you would want them to have with some of the players they have, like Josh Hines Allen and Trevor Lawrence in place, and a Trayvon Walker, stuff like that. So yeah, we'll see. I think it's just not a very good roster. So yeah, maybe Jacoby Myers gives them a boost, but I don't know. It's yeah. Uh, in terms of that game, not a lot of thoughts on this week's game itself. Should be not much fun to watch. A couple more teams that should not be very much fun to watch this week. The Cleveland Browns and the New York Jets. So, the Browns, in terms of their long term outlook, I guess the same as it will. Browns have some more pieces in place, given that the Jets just traded away most of their pieces, right? But I think that Cleveland, if they, you'd like to say if they could just get the quarterback, things would kind of take off. But I think that if you're at the point this season where, Kevin Stefanski's handing off play calling duties to Tommy Reese, like, who knows how it's going in that building. Obviously, Myles Garrett's, once again, not happy with how things are going. But yeah, I don't know. Are you gonna turn the coaching staff over after going into the season with this setup? It's one of those things where it's so easy to say you're not going to do that, but then once the losses start piling up during the season, things tend to go off the rails. Do have Quinton Judkins, but yeah, I think they're on pretty shaky ground in Cleveland. Obviously, Myles Garrett, best player, defensive player in the league, in my opinion, just a freak at the defensive end position. Just he's like that. He's just 101, right? But I just don't think they're maximizing that, and they're not. It's not that I don't think that, right? That's just a fact, and you'd like to say that, hey, we're going to draft the quarterback, and he's going to fix all this, but as we see around this league all the time, that's not how this shit works. And it's one of those things where it's unfortunate that for Cleveland, what, like, I don't know, why did they not have the money? I guess that could have been a problem. I haven't really looked at this, but like, I don't remember them really being in on like Sam Darnold. Maybe that's not where Sam Darnold wanted to go or anything like that. But at some point, like, Daniel Jones, like that whole market, right? Like, I think that there's enough players on this Browns team, and especially with what Quinton Judkins is wound up being, like, this team, their defense is freaking good. And probably could have had a much different season if they would have, pursued some options besides Joe Flacco to be the quarterback. So, uh, a team that pursued some options and it all went sideways. Yeah, the Jets have just undergone a fire sale, and they have a lot of picks in these upcoming drafts here. So that's going to be pretty darn important for the Jets here. But yeah, trading away Sauce Gardner to the Colts, and then Quentin Williams to the Cowboys. It seems like there's just all sorts of stuff going on there. I hear that Quincy Williams has also been benched at this point. Justin Fields, despite having getting them a win, it's up in the air whether he or Tyrod Taylor would start. Which that just doesn't make sense, right? Because Fields is under contract with them. They give him this bonus. So, like, why would you not get him out there and at least see if he can play well enough that you can trade him for, I don't know, something this offseason? Like, no, I'm not suggesting anybody's going to acquire him to be their starter, but I think that, there are teams out there that might consider, hey, if we can, I don't know with the salary. Maybe he's just a guaranteed cut anyway. Sorry, I didn't do my research on that one, but like, um, but you never know if somebody's going to take. There's at the end of the day, there's more upside. There has to be more upside with allowing Justin Fields to continue to play than letting Tyrod Taylor play at this stage in his career. But I don't know. It seems like the vibes are pretty bad there with the Jets, and yeah, they've made it really clear they're not happy with the players they have there, and yeah, so I think that despite the fact that the Jets defense was already liable to be bad any given week, could be even worse this week. I think that once you go down this road of like we're just not going to have any players really, and that's where they're at, right? Like they've got like a couple of pieces on offense that aren't nearly enough, and now they're going to be rebuilding the defense. It's like, well, that's great. You have all these picks, but like, it's it's gonna take a lot for that all to line up and really flip this thing around. And I guess recently, the Texans with the picks they acquired, they were able to do that. Getting CJ Stroud and Will Anderson in the last draft, but like there's a lot of examples of not doing it. But hey, I guess you got to try something. So we'll see. But for the Jets, they've got a long ways to go here, and you're not going to be able to supplement the roster very much in veteran free agency. So really gonna have to hammer these draft picks. So yeah, I don't know. You got lottery teams here that we were talking about there. I think that's pretty easy analysis. Saints Panthers. Yeah, so 39 and 5.5 for the Panthers this week. I'd almost be in. The Panthers. Probably should have been taking them against the Packers. That number was way too big. I don't know. The Saints, it was interesting watching. I thought that Tyler Shutt did some good things in that first game. Like, there's a lot they need to do better, but I thought he generates pretty good velocity on the ball without a lot of effort. And I feel like he was just quiet in the pocket. He's willing to sit back there, find small spaces to launch from it and get the ball out. And I would say that, well, quarterback we're going to talk about next. I just watched Jackson Dart's tape, and I was getting really, really tired of watching him not execute concepts and just scramble. For like honestly, in a lot of cases, I don't really think that he's even trying to run the play at this point. So I don't really know what's going on there, and all the design runs that they're using with him when they're down like 3 scores in the fourth quarter. Like I don't understand. We'll talk about them in a minute. So yeah, it's going to be fun to watch Tyler Shutt over the back half of the season. I think the plan made a lot of sense to get Rattler that half a season and then let Tyler Shutt, sit there, develop, absorb. Not going to be playing on a good team. Rashid Shaheed's out the building now. They've had injuries along the offensive line, but he's going to have his shot here. And I thought he did some things down the stretch, and I think that it's likely that he's more establishing himself as a good backup in this league. But he's getting his opportunity, and there's something there. I think that the arm strength is there for sure, and he can move around a little bit. So he would have been a fun guy to keep watching, and I think that I'd rather as a Saints fan see what he does for the rest of the season than anything else. So we'll see how it all comes together for them. A couple young linemen, but organization really, if you're giving them a grade, just really middling shape, right? Like they're not in the full rebuild mode by any means, but they're not winning any football games right now. So it's just be interesting to see. They're just one more lottery team. So now we're up to 3 teams that have got to get it a lot of things figured out to get themselves competitive again. I think Carolina ends up in the same boat at the end of the day. I think Bryce Young's a smart quarterback and everything like that, but like as I've said up before, I don't really see him as, high end starter in this league at any point, just given the physical limitations. I think that he's always going to be kind of, maybe he winds up being, this generation's kind of Andy Dalton line, where, I don't know that we've really established that of late with somebody that consistent, or a Derek Carr. But, even that, he doesn't have quite their physical ability at their peak. But, Bryce is a creative player and he does some things well. So, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know where the organization goes directionally. It'll be, tough contract negotiation, I think, if whenever he comes up. So 5.5, 39. I don't have a real strong opinion there. Carolina's defense can be so bad. I think Saints are going wrong direction on defense. Kool-Aid McKinstry, pretty rough game last week. We'll see. I think he's still got some tools. You'll have your bad days in the NFL, but yeah, that was not a good one for Kool-Aid. The Giants and the Chicago Bears. So yeah, I think that the Giants and the Bears, organizationally are probably moving in a slightly different direction. With the Bears, so I think with both teams, it's a little bit hard to tell right now. I think overall, it looks like it's all going in the right direction in Chicago, though. I think that Caleb Williams to me is just clearly getting better, and here's a good way to talk about these teams. Caleb Williams is getting better at the things he needs to clearly get better at, right? Like, he's working on the things that he is struggling at, and they're asking him to do those things. And they're insisting he do those things, right? Like, that's very clear. The Giants keep running Jackson Dart like he's Tim Tebow in the fourth quarter, Taysom Hill in the fourth quarter of games they're losing by 3 scores. I don't understand at all how that's benefiting this quarterback's development, or how he needs to be forced to make the decisions and execute the offense in a way that's going to work in the long term. And it's a bummer that he is not throwing to good receivers right now, and that's a real thing. But you can't just not throw any of your short routes on time because the receiver's not good. Like, those guys are still open in a lot of cases, and there are times where he's getting himself into trouble by just like moving unnecessarily and then throwing to the same guy that he was looking at in the first place. And it was just I would say that this week, the tape got to the point where it was a little exasperating to watch. And at some point, like, Tyler Shutt is not in a great situation either, but he is sitting in the pocket and he is playing quarterback in a way that would be familiar with, competent NFL play. And I just don't see how Dart is getting better by kind of running around like this. So we'll see. I think that, Giants are just in a tough spot as an organization. That it doesn't seem like they're going to win a lot more games this year. It doesn't look great, in my opinion. I think Andrew Thomas looks good, but the rest of this offensive line just does not give you a lot at the end of the day at all. And then the aforementioned problems with the receivers, and then skill players in general, right? You've lost Cam Scotty, you've lost Malik Neighbors. So, we'll see where it all goes. And then the defense is just playing so damn bad. I mean, so bad. It's rough to watch. I mean, Deontay Banks is, really struggling out there. There's just so much air on so many of these passes. And then, it's one of those things where, there are times where I'm blanking on the guy who was playing across from him last week, who is just, clearly a backup, and a Keon Black, 38, I think it is. I might be wrong on the name there, but 38, yeah. And there are times where you're watching him, and it's like, why don't they just, throw the Niners, throw the ball at him, every single play. Corey Black from Oklahoma State, the rookie, and then they go over and work on Deontay Banks, and Javon Jennings had some good reps against him. It's like, and Javon Jennings is not moving great right now. That was the other thing, is like the Niners receivers are not, going gangbusters out there, super talented. And they're still just decidedly beating these guys. But yeah, anyway, you beat Black. It's like, why are they not throwing at him every single play? And then it's like, oh yeah, you go back to Banks and you get work done over there too. So I thought Dexter Lawrence was phenomenal against San Francisco. He's still, I don't know what Carl Banks is talking about. That guy is still a monster on the inside. I mean, he was taking dudes for a ride last week. So, I think Abdul Carter is really interesting. The D line is really interesting, but that's like the only thing the team has going for them, and they just don't max it out. And then, with the Bears side of it, the defense is just freaking terrible. And, Yeah, it'll be interesting to see because Dennis Allen has such a great track record in this league, and I think that may have had connections with Ben Johnson. So whether or not he's back, that would be obviously an easy lever to pull. But I think that it's all going in the right direction generally. So I think that you would bring him back and keep the continuity with the staff and everything. But I think that for Chicago, this is what you had to hope for, and it might take a couple of years. For Caleb's not where Drake May is right now, right? Like I think that's fair, but like Caleb's playing, showing a lot of talent, right? And making big plays to win that game with Colston Loveland, and I think he's going to get there in the end, and we'll see exactly what the ceiling looks like, over the years to come. But there's just so much good there, and just have some patience with it. And they're competing right now, so I think that despite all the disappointments on defense, like you'd say Chicago's kind of in a lukewarm situation. I don't think they're heading back to the lottery, whereas I think the Giants, it's just I could see the whole thing blowing up at the end of this year, and we'll see. You got to get somebody who's going to be a champion for Jackson Dart, right? And you would think that the guys who drafted him are going to be that. So maybe you stick with it for that reason. But I think that Bo Nix and Jackson Dart, there's just a lot of similarities with how much they move and everything like that. That the players make me think of each other. And I think that Sean Payton has been so important in keeping Bo moving along a good progression path, and I think that Dart really needs that. So we'll see where it goes. I think, Giants, it's very up in the air. Chicago, I think that we'll see how high the build goes, but I think it's all going positive here. So I'd be excited to be a fan of the that organization right now. Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins. Oh, on the Giants Bears game, 4.5 for Chicago, 46.5 total. No real take on that. Buffalo, Miami this week. 8.5, 9.5 is more books that you're seeing it at 49.5 or 50.5 for the total. Miami, trades away Jalen Phillips this week. Once their star, promising young edge rusher, and obviously Miami as an organization is already in disarray. Like they'll be hiring a new GM. The head coaching decision will be interesting because man, if you move on from Mike McDaniel, you moving on from Tua, and obviously Tua Tagovailoa has, I thought he was in a real bad spot until Mike McDaniel came in, and it's been a real pleasant surprise to see him develop. But he's definitely a very specific type of quarterback, and I don't know. I think that if you want to keep Tua in the building, you would probably want to keep McDaniel, given what they've done together. But who knows here? And I think that they just it's just the perfect example of why you can't just trade all your draft picks for stars and sign them to these big extensions when they're older. Tyreek Hill was older. Bringing in Bradley Chubb when he was older. I'm trying to think of Jalen Ramsey. That wasn't as expensive an acquisition, but they just went kind of nuts with that, loading up on the rookie contract window for Tua, and then it's like, well, okay, if you're going to go get another rookie quarterback, maybe that makes sense. But then you pay Tua, and that this was predictable if you looked at their roster and just how it was aging, and you didn't know how it was going to blow up, but it was just so volatile as time went on. So not surprising, obviously game is lined the way it is for a reason. If it was 8.5, you could play the teaser down. I'd stay away with Buffalo at 9.5. But I think tough deal for them. And then, the Buffalo side, obviously mentioned them earlier. And, they're right there on the cusp of winning the Super Bowl. Get the win against the Chiefs this week. Hopefully Maxwell Hurston, if his health can continue to be a positive like that would be so huge for them if they hit on that pick. And obviously his absence over the early part of the season is tough. It sucked to hear that Michael Hoyt got hurt right. I thought he played well in his first game for them, but goes down. But positive is that Bosa's been healthy, so we'll see. I think that Buffalo is gonna keep cooking with James Cook and Brandon Beane and the whole crew. And again, it's like Baltimore, they're going to keep having swings. I think they're in great shape as an organization and just a consistent contender. So fun group to be cheering for, going in very different directions than the Miami Dolphins. I think the AFC East probably is the starkest cutoff line between the top two teams in the division and the bottom two, and the health of the organizations, and just night and day, right? So a couple other teams, Arizona Cardinals and the Seattle Seahawks, and we'll talk all four NFC West teams in a row here. And you talk about one team that Well, it's interesting right now that Jacoby Brissett's playing pretty darn good for the Arizona Cardinals, and Marvin Harrison's lighting it up for them, and Trey McBride's continuing to be involved. Like, man, like where is this organization? And I don't know. Like Jacoby, I've always liked his game to a degree. I've just felt he's always been a little too inaccurate. Right? It's just a little too spotty. If it was like 10% better, I think he'd be a consistent above average starter in the league. He's got good size. He's stays in the pocket. He executes the play. He's mobile enough. Well, for one, that Bill Belichick designed a triple option attack around him as a rookie. But that's not a big part of his game now. But he's can definitely go pick up a first down for you. So Arizona's put Kyler Murray on injured reserve here, and it seems like they're moving on from him. And I think like similar to Tua, in terms of being such a specific type of player, you can kind of understand why, because there's just so many concepts that he's not executing, and you really see how stark that is once Brissett's out there. And we'll see what happens with Kyler. Kyler's always been, I think I've always described him as unbelievably entertaining and just an electric athlete, but he's just never continued to grow his game to really do everything he needs to do to maximize the field. And maybe this is a wake up call for him, and it causes growth for him, and maybe he winds up being a Cleveland Brown next year, to use the team I was talking about earlier, and pushing them over the top, because you just never know. And obviously Kyler's a talented guy, but he needs to continue to grow his game and use the middle of the field more, just execute more, just standard concepts on time, instead of just making his own plays, because that's just not a way to live in the NFL. Oh, flip side of this, Seattle Seahawks, man, they are humming. And you talk about a guy who just kept going with Sam Darnold, and it's just pretty inspiring to me to see the way this guy's playing these days. And he is just so talented. I mean, we'll talk about the Niners in a minute, and obviously they've had several good quarterbacks through there in recent years. But Darnold is the most talented of them, in my opinion, and it's obviously they've got Brock Purdy, and that's not a bad place to be. But man, just in terms of like pure arm strength, those things, I think that Darnold grades out a little bit higher. I think there's a reason Darnold went, where he went in the draft, and Purdy went later, right? And obviously Purdy has vastly outperformed that, but like he's still not a guy who's got ultra great physical tools. And I do think Purdy uses mobility great and everything. And I like Brock Purdy a lot, but man, Sam Darnold just looks fantastic right now. And, with the way Jackson Smith and Jigba's going, and, what they're getting out of the O line now, with looks like, Charles Cross, Abe Lucas back to being the long-term bookends, which was up in the air for a couple of years of their rookie deal. But with what Gray Zabel's doing for them, their ability to find a Jalen Sundell, who, not a world beater by any means, but he brings better size to the position than what they had. And just being able to find somebody like that who can start for you, that you didn't give up anything for. Those are just good wins for the organization. And then, Leonard Williams just continues to be unbelievable in this defense. And then Byron Murphy up and coming. They got so many good players in this organization. And obviously John Schneider and Mike McDonald have formed a really good partnership, and they know what they're looking for. And then bringing in Clint Kubiak and having him, work at this high of a level